let's talk about values. Companies have them, people have them, communities have them, families have them, and so on. But very few of all those entities are entirely clear about what their values are, or very good at holding themselves accountable to walk the talk of those values. Now, when I say that, you may have an immediate reaction along the lines of, but of course I know what my values are. Stick with me here. Companies put pretty posters on the wall, and in general, people and communities and families know they have values simply because, of course, everyone has values. But they don't necessarily have real clarity about them or actually do anything about or with them. So let's talk about that. I'm going to explain what it really means to understand and then verbify your values, and no, that is not a real word, but it should be. What I mean by verbify is that you absolutely know what actions you or your company, community, family, and so on take that represent the living proof that you're doing your best to represent those values in the world. Hi, I'm Grace Judson, self-proclaimed leadership geek, and I'm here to help every one of you become the leader your team needs, your company needs, your family needs, your community needs, and you need to be. Thanks for being here. And as always, feel free to subscribe. Just click the little subscribe icon down below, and then you'll find out more about what I have to offer on this subject of leadership. So, values. Obviously, the first step is to be clear about what your values are. Whether you're a leader within an organization and you want to make sure your employees understand what the company stands for, or you're personally interested in digging deeper into who you are and what you stand for, you need to identify, articulate, and validate the values that matter to you. I heard a story a while ago about a company whose leaders all put in tons of time on the job. Not very unusual, unfortunately. They just assumed it was expected of them. It wasn't until they had a meeting to review and articulate and, yes, verbify, though I guess they probably didn't use that word, their values as an organization, that they realized that although every one of them said they valued family, they weren't walking the talk. Instead of spending time with their families, they were spending long hours working. And this is the kind of transformative insight that can come from doing this work. Spend some time on it, really, because values are not simple things. Yes, we all value honesty, for instance, but what does honesty actually mean for you? And is it really what you value, or are you more aligned with the idea of, let's say, integrity? Most people will say they value family, but if you are, for instance, estranged from your family of origin for some reason, or you're not part of a close-knit family, perhaps what you value is independence. In other words, do not pick a value because you think you should have it. Pick up values that really sincerely matter to you. And don't pick a boatload of values. Seriously, 2 or 3 is enough because, and this is fascinating actually, once you really know what those 2 or 3 are, you'll discover that the other things that you might also have chosen will naturally be a part. They'll fit underneath or within one of those 2 or 3 rather than standing on its own. So, for instance, integrity could encompass, depending on who you are, honesty, authenticity, reliability, and so on. And it is up to you to decide what your values mean. No one else, not even the dictionary. Obviously, if you're working with a group, whether it's family, a community of some sort, your team, your company, you need to have agreement on both the word and how you define it. And be careful with this. You need to define it clearly, because otherwise, if you assume that everyone knows what a particular word means and how you're using it, you run a risk of having slightly different definitions and then wondering why everyone is going off in different directions. I've seen that happen in leadership teams, and it is not pretty. It leads to a lot of confusion and disagreement and conflict. So, whether for yourself or for your company, your team, your community, you have your 2 or 3 core values. Now what? Now it's time to verbify them. And yes, I really want that to be a real word, because Until we verbify, and I'm going to tell you in a minute what I mean by that, we can't take action. Action is not part of the picture until we have a verb, an action word, or phrase or sentence. So what do I mean by verbify? Generally speaking, values are abstract. Family, what does that really mean to you? Integrity, what does that mean? Yes, you've defined it, but now you need to take a further step and identify the actions that demonstrate that you're living up to that value. Side note, will you always live up to it? No. Hello, that's called being human. I'll leave a link to an article discussing that point down in the description below this video, and some other articles on this topic of values as well. Okay, if you know the actions that demonstrate the value, then you can hold yourself, your family, your team, and so on accountable. You can clearly see if your employees are walking the talk of the company values because you have defined the actions that demonstrate that. And of course, you have let them know what those actions are. You can offer them feedback, and you can receive feedback from others as to how well you're all doing. So, what does it look like to verbify your values? Well, it can look different for different people. Different people will have slightly different definitions of the word to start with, and then slightly different, or perhaps even considerably different, actions that they feel will truly represent showing up with that value. So let's take a look at integrity, which is one of mine. And to me, just briefly, it means I do the right thing, even when it's scary. I take a stand for what I believe in, and I ask for what I want and need, even when that feels vulnerable. So do you see then how I can measure myself, evaluate whether I'm actually living up to that value of integrity? This is challenging work. It's a lot easier to say, oh, hey, yeah, of course I value integrity, but then not necessarily actually take action on that. Sometimes it's because we don't really know what that action is, like those leaders I mentioned earlier who weren't actually living their shared value of family. I can imagine that their verbification of family might include, I stop work by 5 o'clock every weekday and I don't work on weekends, and perhaps we have a family dinner together at least 3 times a week. Or whatever's right for their family and their situation. I cannot emphasize enough that this is very, I'm going to say personal, even though when I say personal, I also mean personal in the sense that it applies to the personality of a team or of a company or of a community. Here's the thing. If you don't tie actions to your values, you run a real risk of not living those values. Not because you're a bad person or you're failing in some way, but simply because you haven't given yourself the direction you need. You haven't given your team or your organization the direction it needs. And then you wonder why your life seems out of whack and why your employees are cynical and disengaged. So there you have it. I've left some links to articles down in the video description below. So by all means, click through, take a look. And if you have found this video helpful or interesting or even slightly annoying, definitely subscribe and click the little notifications bell so you'll know when I post new videos. I'm not really on a schedule with that. I tend to record videos when I feel like I really have something to say rather than on a set calendar. So having that notification really helps you know when I have dropped a new video. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.